Hey everyone, my name is Karel, and today we're going to be taking a look at how to decorate your maps. Now, please note, when I'm talking about decorating, I'm not really referring to making your map look good. That's a secondary effect to what we're going to be covering here, and it's pretty much one that I'm going to leave up to your own discretion to achieve. I'll go over a few quick pointers here and there, but for the most part, I'm just going to leave that part up to you. Rather, what I'm going to talk about is how to use decorations to make your map deadlier and more effective. Now, at its heart, using decorations as a tool to kill the raider is mostly just about obscuring what's actually happening. So a lot of what I'm going to be talking about here just involves obscuring the raider's vision for a critical moment or two. You provide some sort of visual and audible distraction. And really, that's all you need to do. You just need to give those traps a moment to activate, you need to give the guards time to launch their shots, and that's going to make them deadlier. And we can actually use decorations and decals and attachments as a way of doing that. So this is really going to be about enhancing the combat effectiveness of your outpost. Let's not remove that block there. This is going to be about removing or adding to the combat effectiveness of your outpost just by making it look pretty. The way you do this, of course, is to simply distract the raider. You want their attention to be focused somewhere other than where the danger actually is. To assist in the discussion, I've brought along another style of map here. This is a big, open, kind of tower climb style of map. And I can go ahead and walk through the path here as we're talking, but basically what we're going to do here is just decorate this map. You can see I made it entirely out of this red glass and concrete, and really those two things are not all that visually complex, right? We're not using a whole lot of noise here, so it's very easy to look over there and say, that's a trap. I can immediately point out that trap because there's nothing else going on here, right? There's no visual noise, and I can hear guards all over the place in the background. I know exactly where they are because there's no audio noise. So we're going to be kind of trying to enhance the raider's experience by adding to both of those elements. Now, of course here, I could have used a more visually complicated block to make this outpost out of, but I want to kind of prove a point here. You don't need the fancy, complicated-looking block types in order to make a really well-decorated outpost that will still get plenty of kills. So that's what we're going to try and do. We're going to try and make this plain gray-walled outpost into a really deadly trap. This is a brutal outpost. It's got a lot of traps down here already, as you've already noticed. So it's got some stuff going for it already, and it's going to deal quite a bit of damage to raiders. They're probably going to die several times in this main area. So that's all well and good, but can we make it better? That's the question. Now, as you've seen here in the background, I've kind of walked you through the map in build mode just so you can get an idea of what we're already looking at. Now, please note as I'm doing this exactly how easy it is to see absolutely everything. If I was sitting here with a plasma crossbow, I could easily see and pick off all of these guards. I mean, obviously they're going to be firing back, which complicates things, but generally speaking, I can pick these things off from almost any distance with any weapon. Right, like the plasma sentinels in the ceiling up here are very exposed, and the guards over here are really quite, they stand out from their background a lot. So we're going to try and improve those elements somewhat. Now, the first thing to cover here is just some basic painting. I've gone ahead and painted the inside of the map with some solid colors here, and you'll see that I've used a complicated color for the ceiling, and I've got a back wall that's in a different color and uses some interesting paint. And then most of the rest of it is just a nice red color. Looks like I actually missed a spot up here, so I'm just going to go ahead and fill that in with my ceiling paint. And I have missed a spot here. I'll just fill that in. And then I've got some interesting little bits and pieces here. I actually don't like that all that much. We're just going to go ahead and paint that red. But yeah, in general, what I've done here is to try and add some visual noise to the room. Basically by making the entire room considerably more visually complex, and that's really all there is to it here. We're trying to make everything as complicated as possible to visually identify the traps, and already I would say there's a big improvement here, right? The traps don't stand out quite so much, there's a lot more to pay attention to, so the raider's not going to pick things out quite so easily. And really, this is usually the first step I take here. I just paint the chunks of the inside of the map in some solid different colors. I'll make an accent wall a different color than the base coat. I'll add some visual patterns here and there. I'll try and disguise the traps just a little bit. And, by itself, this isn't a hugely effective thing, right? It doesn't confuse the raider too much. However, the decorating and creating confusion by decorating really isn't about any one thing. It's about adding a lot of tiny things that combine to produce an effect that's significant enough to matter. So this base coat of paint that I added is just the first step, but it's kind of an important one because it sets the theme and tone for the rest of the area. Next up, let's talk about noise. Now, obviously guards and traps make sound, right? A raider with a reasonably good sound system will be able to echolocate or figure out where traps and guards are from the direction of the sound. Modern headsets are pretty good at letting you determine where a sound is coming from in a game, and even basic speakers will let you do the same thing. So really, sound is another thing in the raider's arsenal that lets them find your traps and guards, and that's something that we kind of want to obscure a little bit. While we're on the topic of distraction, there's really no reason to make things obvious. So what we're going to do is go in here, and let's just look through some of these decorations here. We have a lot of different decorations that can provide a little bit of sound. This Flesh Bloom from the Hellscape pack, I believe it's the Piston here from Lost City, the Gearworks from Medieval Siege, the Spinning Enigma from the Scorched Necropolis, the Engine from the Dead by Daylight pack, which I actually don't have. There's this ventilation thing, there's the computerized panel. All of these make sound, and they provide some sort of movement along with it. Also worth noting that both hollow cubes and corrosive cubes make some small amount of sound and provide some small amount of movement in the background, so those are an option. It's not a lot of noise, it's not a lot of movement, it won't really obscure much of anything, but it does exist and it can add up in conjunction with the attachments. Now, it is quite important to not spam noisemakers. If you put them everywhere, the raider will stop relying on audio cues to find traps and guards, and they'll fall back to using other methods, and they'll become more cautious and more aware using those other methods usually. So, if they stop being able to hear things, they'll look for things instead, and because they stop paying attention to the audio, there are fewer tools that you can use to potentially confuse the raider. So instead you want to use these noisy traps in key areas when you really want to obscure something, and use them in a couple of other places here and there, just so that it's not obvious that whenever there's a noisemaker, there's also going to be some sort of a trap that the map maker doesn't want you to see, right? So you can't just put them near traps, and you can't spam them everywhere. You need a mixture. You need them both in places where there aren't a trap to obscure, and you need them in places where there is a trap to obscure, and you don't want them everywhere all at the same time, right? So when you spam these all over the place, a raider is far less likely to leave accolades, and that's largely because it can cause frame rate issues, especially with some of the moving attachments like this Spinning Enigma here. So you have to be a little bit careful about that, because you're both trying to make the raid experience fun for the raider, and you're trying to, obscure the presence of a sound cue that could get the raider killed. So you want to use these things, but you don't want to be annoying about it. Because you have to ask yourself, do you want one kill from an abandon and no accolades if you spam these on every single surface, or do you want the raider to stick around long enough to die several times and be happy enough to leave you accolades? The answer to that's pretty obvious, and so is the resulting decision: don't place these on every surface. Now, as a general rule, I like to place them on around 1 in 10 of the available surfaces. That seems to be a pretty good balance to me. So let's go ahead and start plonking some of these down, right? We'll go ahead and talk a bit as we go through this, but I'm going to start out with this gear set because it's a nice noisy thing. And it doesn't look bad there. It's got some noise to it, it's got some movement to it. It's a nice dark block, and in general it will help obscure things both visually and audibly. So while we're working on that, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about movement, right? As you can see, that's a very fast-moving trap, or rather, it provides some degree of movement along the surface of the thing. Well, I shouldn't call it a trap, it's a decoration. So the human eye is strongly drawn towards movement, and as you probably noted in here, we've got a fair number of guards, we've got a fair number of traps, and things like these plasma sentinels here are, well, they stand out quite a lot, really. So we want to maybe obscure those a little bit, and we want to, make this entryway look a little interesting. So we're just going to plop a couple of those things in there. Doesn't need to be too much, we're just going to use 2. And that will provide a little bit of noise, it'll help obscure the sounds of the guards, it'll help to give just a little bit of movement towards the door and above you, and that's probably not enough to distract from that particular plasma sentinel in there, but it's something, right? It's an improvement. Again, this is all about layering. No single thing that we can put in here is going to really work to obscure all of the nonsense that's going on in this room. But just layering tons of little things makes each little bit a little bit more effective. So we're going to go ahead and put that over there. It looks interesting and like it could be, a nice mechanical bit there. Let's go ahead and put, let's actually take that off of that surface and we'll put one there. And we're just going to put a little door there, just something to make it look like, that's the doorway to enter. Next up, let's take a look at some of these spinning enigmas here. These do fit quite nicely under paint, but they still have a little bit of gold showing through them. And we've got these two plasma sentinels up here, and you'll notice they have a nice bright yellow color on them. I want to maybe take something with a bit of nice bright yellow color on it, like these things, which are bright and yellow and shiny, and I can use those to maybe distract from the bright shiny yellow of the plasma sentinels a little. Again, no single thing is going to distract the raider from that, because that's very bright and annoying and obnoxious, and it's not going to pull the raider's attention away, but just that momentary hesitation is what you're looking for there. You just want the raider to hesitate a tiny bit, just look a little bit away or be distracted by something else going on, and that little hesitation is really what you're after more than anything else. So we're going to use one of those there. Let's use a couple more up in this area to add some movement up there. You'll notice that they paint quite nicely as well, and they'll give a little bit of visual interest to that area up there without being too overloading or obnoxious. Next, let's go ahead and put maybe a couple of gears down there, and I don't like those painted white so much. I'm actually going to remove the paint, and they should fit in quite nicely. Next up, we're just going to look for some opportunities to break up large flat surfaces that are solid colors. So I've used this kind of stripy block for roofs up there, and that doesn't really, a whole wall of that is already quite visually complicated enough. But the red up here is solid panels, and large solid panels like that just, they don't really draw the eye. There's nothing there to confuse the raider. It's just color. So we can do a few little things here and there to help with that. For instance, we can do, let's just put some of these here. Actually, that's a terrible place to put that because it's under the red paint color. This particular decoration does seem to like to get painted. That's not really what I'm looking for here. So let's find a different one. Let's go with these guys, this partial paneling. So we're just going to put these in a few different spots around here, and we're going to use it to try and not really distract so much as just add a little bit more visual noise. And that's just going to be another tool in our arsenal there. We're not really changing anything about the map itself. We're basically just, tweaking. We're adding a little bit more visual complexity in a couple of different spots. While we're at it here, I just noticed a couple of unpainted surfaces there, and I thought I saw some somewhere else up here as well, but I'm not seeing that now. There's one. Let's go ahead and get that. So now really what we need to do is just try and figure out something to break up this pathway and these large surfaces over here. We can't really, we could go back to our decorations and try and do that, or we could try and find another one of these attachments that's going to actually do the trick. We could do something like, we can plop some of these around. It doesn't show up super well under the red paint, unfortunately, so we might want to think of using different paint colors here and there, but we can, just break up the visual aspect of the map a little bit using these attachments. Let's put, we can put some stuff here. It looks like I missed a couple spots of the red paint, and let's go ahead and grab, what should we use next? Let's go ahead and grab one of these guys. Again, the Gearworks are a nice block to use for a little bit of movement here and there. We'll just put a couple of those symmetrically around there. That'll add some movement to the floor, which is always interesting to see. And let's put one of them up here. Let's actually put that right there. And that will help offset the symmetrical piston placed on the other side of the path. Just to add a few more things in here and there, let's go ahead and put one of these over there. We can flip it around and put one that way over here. we can just do some various minor things on the floor. Some floor grates actually will look nice on this painted yellow. These are very obviously going to be hollow cubes. That's one thing that you have to be very careful of when you're placing a lot of these floor decorations and stuff. When you're placing these, you just have to be really careful to understand. Well, not careful to understand, but you do need to understand in as you're placing all of your decorations that if you try and use any hollow cubes near this, those hollow cubes are going to stick out like a sore thumb. The raider immediately knows they're there, and it is not a problem at all to identify those as hollow cubes and deal with them appropriately. The only reason that I'm going with this in this particular case is because I don't care if the raider sees these, right? This particular room, in fact, that should have been an Eagle Eye hollow cube. This particular room doesn't matter if the raider knows where the hollow cubes are. In fact, for all intents and purposes, I might as well just take picture perfect off of these hollow cubes. It's painfully obvious what they are, right? There really is no point in having picture perfect on hollow cubes that are standing out in the middle of nowhere. And yes, that is a hollow cube exactly in the middle of the room. There is actually a reason for that. See if you can find it. Anyway, the general gist of what we're trying to do here, unpainted surface, is basically just break up all of the visual aspect of the map. We're trying to make things as complex as possible. Again, we're trying to add some movement in here. We're trying to add some noise to obscure guards and traps and all that fun stuff. And really, I think we're fairly close to accomplishing that here. Let's go ahead and add in our floor attachment over there and there. In fact, let's just take the paint off that. Make it a nice little dark corner. A little bit darker than it already was. Okay, so that is in pretty good shape, and I kind of like how this turned out. Pardon the cat jumping on the desk there. So, yeah, I think we are close to being done with this room. And one final note here, I did end up removing the yellow paint on the floor. I just decided I didn't like how it looked, and I liked the look of the raw floor grading just a little bit better. So I painted the blocks where I couldn't fit that floor grading this nice deep red from the walls, and we're just going to use the raw floor grading as our flooring surface. Now, one thing I do want to point out to you about attachments. We've all seen attachments and how they look on the side of a surface, right? They fit the surface exactly. There is no border around this whatsoever. On these surfaces, however, and by the way, I should grab a trap here and note that it does exactly the same thing. There are no borders around any edge of that trap. However, the angled surfaces of each type of block here are slightly longer than the flat surfaces. So in order to make the trap fit, Behavior added these nice little panels at the top and bottom of the trap. And the same applies for the attachments. In fact, it is the same panel. It's also very much worth noting that you can see the top of this panel from up at the top of a block. You can see that coming if you have, say, a few more blocks out here. And if I was to come up on this, you can see there's a little metal strip along that edge. It's very subtle. A lot of people aren't going to notice it. But if I was to remove one of those and then come over here and look and see, okay, there's a metal strip over here, there isn't one over here, I know this block is safe to walk on. At least there's no trap on the surface. Whereas this one, there might have been a trap, or it might have been a decoration. So you do need to be a little bit careful about your traps and attachment placement, because those metal strips are visible before you even cross over the lip of the edge. So I don't even have to get close to that in order to see that there was a trap there. Just be a little bit aware of that, and maybe even use that to your advantage. You can make the raider a lot more cautious, and potentially even make them look down to see why that metal strip is there if you place an attachment on one of these sloped surfaces. Next up, let's talk a bit about lighting. Lighting is one of the most powerful tools in your arsenal, and it operates in several different ways. Lights, of course, draw the raider's eye, but beyond that, there's two particularly interesting use cases. The first is relatively obvious. A light placed between you and another object greatly obscures that object if, and only if, the object is not brightly lit itself. The object cannot be brighter than the light, or it shows up regardless. So, since nothing in Meet Your Maker except for corrosive cubes, plasma sentinels, and guards charging their weapons are actually all that bright, even in dim lighting provided by light attachments in Meet Your Maker, that's sufficient to somewhat visually obscure the traps. To maximize this effect, you want the lights about halfway between the raider's expected location and the trap, so that the light doesn't shed much actual light on the trap, but is still well within the raider's field of view. The second lighting trick here is to cast something in shadow, and you do that by putting a light behind it. This is called silhouetting the thing, and by placing a darker object in front of a lighter background or a lit background, it means that while you can easily see the outline of the thing, it's somewhat difficult to tell what it actually is because the background is brighter. You can't actually see what the darker thing in front of it is clearly. Now, this isn't great for guards because guards have a very distinctive outline. You've got the hulking warmongers, the really tall cannonbacks with a giant arm. You've got short and stooping enforcers, and hornets, well, you can tell they're hornets because they're flying, of course. Anyway, it still does work to a degree if you put a bright orange or red color near where the expected firing position of the guard is, because it can obscure the actual gun charging animation, that bright orange glow. So it's still somewhat useful even in that case, even though it's not really ideal. So what we're going to do here, we're just going to grab these bar lights. These are probably one of the most powerful tools to apply lighting to a map, because it's a fairly bright light, and you can apply it along one edge of a surface. So we can do some things here. For instance, we know there's a bunch of traps up in that area up there, and we can obscure those to some degree just by putting a light in there. Worth noting that these bar lights are directional. One side of them, this side that they're on the side of, I should say, is much brighter than if you see them from over here. Over here, the metallic frame of the thing is mostly obscuring the lights themselves, so it is mostly a one-directional effect, or it is at least at its most effective in one direction. I guess you could argue two directions because this side is also pretty open as well. So really what we need to do next is just to add a bunch of lighting in here, and we're going to try and do this in a few different areas to obscure a few things that are going on. In fact, let's go ahead and remove that attachment, and we're going to go ahead and grab that red paint color and put it back in there. And we're just going to do that on both sides here, because I would like to make it less clear where the guard is. So there are guards up there, and by adding those lights in there, while you can see the lights of the guard, the rest of that area up there is actually in shadow, at least to some degree. Speaking of which, I just saw a unpainted area. Let's go ahead and fix that. Okay, so we've got a little bit of lighting in here. Let's go ahead and grab our light bar again, and let's look at some other places where we might want lights. Now, if I was going to hold really true to the concept of obscuring things, I would put a light, say right about there, and that would be fairly effective. But I don't really want to go that direction here. I kind of like that gear being where it is, and I do want a noisemaker out there. Let's just say I've got a surprise for the raider outside, and it relies on obscuring guard footsteps. So let's go ahead and put a couple of lights in here instead, and I can see the glow of those things, and as I get over here, I can start to see more and more of the light, and then over here, that lets me easily identify where the entrance is. I actually want the raider to back out the entrance in this case because I've got several things that are designed to shoot at the raider and potentially kill them as they leave the area, so I am alright with that concept. Another thing we can do here, there are guards over in these areas. I wouldn't mind putting a couple of lights in there just to make that a little less obvious, or make the guards a little bit more difficult to see their weapon arm charging. Where else can we do some interesting things? We've got some attachments there. Don't be afraid, too, to use lights as actual decorations here. We do have several different lights available to us, and I kind of like these Egyptian-themed ones. They look quite nice. So I'm going to use a couple of those there. While I'm thinking about it as well, I'm actually going to go ahead and paint that guy red because I like the look of it. And I'm going to rotate the striping there. And let's go ahead and grab our light bars again. Don't be afraid just to use lights as actual decoration. It won't hurt anything. You will hurt no one's feelings by providing light in your map. So we're just going to throw in some extra lights. Okay, here, this is a good example. Let's go ahead and grab a light bar here, and we're just going to put one there. That's all we need. That's all we need to do. It's going to make that plasma sentinel a little less obvious when it fires. Not much less obvious, but as we've said, every little bit helps. And also add a couple of lights up there. And let's go ahead and just kind of line this area up here. We don't want to overuse lights, the same with any decorative tool, really. Overusing a thing will make it less effective, and it's just not good practice in general. So I'm just going to add a few things here and there. I'm not going to go too crazy with it. Let's go ahead and grab our light, temple light again, and I kind of like the idea of having one up there. Oh, I don't like that paint scheme on it, though. Yeah, let's drop that. I may end up dropping this paint scheme later. I'm not a huge fan of the stripey paint scheme. Just a little bit too noisy for my taste. Let's see. Anything else we can do up here? We do like having things obscured. Oop, unpainted wall. Ooh, several unpainted walls. Gotta fix that. Can't have those unpainted things laying around. Alright, so let's go ahead and grab our light bars again. The tube lighting, I should say. Is there anywhere else that would be useful to put these? I could put them up here, but I'm not really super sold on that. I feel like it would just cast more light on the guard and make them easier to identify. So I think what I'm going to do instead is put some lights there, kind of bound that little enclosure there. And I think I'm probably going to call that just about good. We can do a little bit better job of obscuring here if we turn that light. So let's go ahead and do that. And then that should, in theory at least, keep the guard, or keep the light away from the guard a little bit further, and it should let the other lights do their jobs a little more. And speaking of which, I don't like those lights over there. I don't think that's actually going to do much of anything. Let's go ahead and remove that. And anything else we can do in here? Let's go ahead and grab... I could put bar lights up and down the sides of this. That is an option. But I think what I'd prefer to do... Yeah, that looks interesting. So let's go with that. And if I painted in here yet, I have, kind of. Let's go ahead and grab our red paint scheme. Ah, yes, I did away with the yellow mostly, but not entirely. There we go. So let's grab our bar lights next. And let's go ahead and add... I can't put one there because of the angle block. Decorations, by the way, really do not like these angle blocks. You'll not be able to successfully put an attachment on any side of that block except for the full solid surface side. Okay, so let's see here. If I was to put lighting there, that actually gives it kind of an interesting visual effect. I don't like that that side isn't symmetrical, but, you know, I'll deal with it. That's good enough. So another thing I'm going to do is just plop a couple lights down here. This area is interestingly not symmetrical. It is very intentionally not symmetrical. That is a very conscious design decision because it is relatively easy to see something coming. If you know where it is on one side, it's pretty easy to make the assumption that it is the same on the other side. Except for, in this area, I start out being symmetrical, right? These traps over here are symmetrical. But then you have hollow cubes over here obscuring a bolt shot trap, whereas over here it's an open incinerator trap. And over here I've got an incinerator where I've got a bolt shot over there. So by keeping this area slightly asymmetric, it makes the Raider less able to predict where things are coming from. And that enhances our decoration game even further. So that is a tool that I will make great use of when the opportunity presents itself. You know what? A light there is actually going to enhance the effect over there, and it will probably obscure that incinerator trap a little better. And where else can we do something interesting? Let's go ahead and put a light in up there. And I kind of like the idea of framing that area in lights. You'll note I'm not putting these down on every possible surface, right? Like I could put them all the way over here, I could stick one up here, but I really don't want to do that because adding too many lights is as bad as adding none at all. In fact, it's far worse in some respects. Everything in moderation here. You want to be careful about how much you're putting into any given area. So I think that is probably just about good. that will enhance the effectiveness of the area quite a bit, I think, because in general it's going to be much more confusing, much less obvious compared to our original starting area, our unpainted, unlit, undecorated area. And I think that's really what we're shooting for here. So I think for that, or at that rather, we are going to call it a day. Hope you all have enjoyed watching, and I'll see you next time.